Good morning. My name is Peter Saunders. I would firstly like to thank the committee for the opportunity to take this submission. By way of background, I'm a fifth-generation New Zealander, a descendant of farmers and business people and who have fought in wars, paid their taxes, and contributed positively to the building of this great democracy we call New Zealand. I am at heart a patriot who believes strongly in the democratic principles of nationhood, one man, one vote, the rule of law, individual property rights, and most importantly, freedom of speech. In my opinion, these are the foundation stones of our democracy. Sorry, I lost. Personally, I believe the Treaty of Waitangi has been a net positive for New Zealand, including Maori. It initially brought about the immediate cessation of the widespread warfare, enslavement, and members of opposing tribal groups and other undesirable customs, while also providing a relatively peaceful way to build the bureaucratic platform needed to progress toward nationhood. There is no doubt there were treaty breaches by the Crown over the ensuing years. Some of them were significant. However, as a country, we have made an honest attempt to redress these breaches, which in the case of most iwi has enabled them to develop a solid base of financial autonomy. Unfortunately, we are in the unusual position where many laws passed by Parliament now require compliance with the principles of the treaty, despite there being no authoritative list of what those principles are. The courts, the Waitangi Tribunal, and academics now determine what those principles are and which ones should be applied in any particular circumstance. That uncertainty helps no one but lawyers. It does not help us to unite New Zealand. It does not help New Zealand continue to progress and develop as a modern, successful country. The concept of the Crown, while slightly esoteric, is actually quite simple. It is actually all of us. It is every third, fourth, or fifth generation descendant of the early settlers. It is also every recent Chinese, Chilean, Filipino, or Indian immigrant. And importantly, it is all those who identify themselves as Maori, most of whom share significantly more genetic similarity with these settlers and immigrants groups than the tribal chiefs that signed the treaty in the first place. The Crown certainly is not Great Britain, nor is it the British Empire, and hasn't been for well over a century. When the Crown is undermined, when Parliament is undermined, we're all undermined. Our democracy gets weaker, and our ability to work together on other big issues gets harder because the trust between us all is eroding. The vast majority of MPs appear to be running away from what I believe is the most pressing issue facing our country and our democracy. The bill is not about redressing historical grievances or taking away existing rights, as some in the media seem to believe. The bill simply adds certainty to what the principles are. If members of this committee don't agree with the principles listed in the bill, I challenge them to provide the country with their definitive list and how they intend to articulate those principles to the whole population. Continuing to allow activists to decide how they think the law should be interpreted rather than interpreting what was intended by Parliament is a dereliction of your duty as MPs. You need to have faith that the citizens of New Zealand are grown up enough to have this conversation and want an outcome that will set the country and its citizens in good stead for the next 200 years as a thriving democracy. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Peter. We've got time for questions. Members, any members have questions? Look, I'll ask you a question then, if I may, and sure. It's really around the functions of the courts, which seems to have been a central theme. I'm really curious as to what you consider the relationship between the courts and Parliament to be, because in many developed democracies, the relationship between the two is, reciprocal, in that the courts are in some ways a check on excesses of Parliament, and Parliament, of course, gives direction through laws as to what the courts are to implement. Do you see that as a kind of reciprocal and equal relationship, or something different?
I certainly see the Parliament as the should set the precedent, or is the Premier decision maker? And if it doesn't agree with what the courts have decided, it should have the ability to either change legislation to ensure that the future decisions made by the court are to its expectation. But I also think we're in an interesting constitutional situation where, unlike the United States, we don't have a constitution, which is written and therefore much easier to articulate and to ensure that the legislation or that the way the courts are interpreting it meets the constitutional requirement. I also think that because we've lost the ability of the Privy Council to look over the shoulder of decisions as a final arbiter, we don't get a fully, what's the right word, impartial view of the way the legislation should be looked at or the way it should be interpreted, and therefore we've kind of lost the trick or lost a final check and balance. And we don't have an upper house. We don't have a lot of the checks and balances during the legislative process that other countries have. So, for example, Australia and Canada, who both run along a similar Westminster system to us, both have upper houses. We don't have that. UK obviously does. And so, we find ourselves slightly lacking and I think slightly at the mercy of the judicial system because of that. Does that answer the question, Duncan?
I think there's some ways. I'm not sure I want to have a upper house of bishops and
I'm not necessarily saying we do that I do either. But what I am saying is that because we don't have one, some of those legislative decision-making processes aren't covered off, and also or aren't looked at from a different perspective as they are by the House of Lords or in other jurisdictions. But also we don't have that slightly impartial or detached view that we used to get from the Privy Council. So we're in a situation where we're missing a wee bit. I think we've lost some of those checks and balances that we had as we set up the democracy in the first place.
All right. Look, thanks. I think we'll leave it there. But thanks for your submission, and I've got your written submission in front of me as well. So thank you also for that.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes.